Hey, what is going on guys? Floris here and welcome to the first of many Crypt of the NecroDancer Boss Guide videos. In this series we will take a look at how each boss fight in the game works and what kind of strategies you can use in order to defeat these bosses. There's a total of 8 boss fights in the game and each of these videos will focus on a different boss fight. In today's video we are going to take a look at our first boss on the list, which is going to be no other than Death Metal. Death Metal is one of the 4 non-story related bosses in the game. This boss fight has the fastest soundtrack in the entire game. For normal tempo characters this is going to be 175 beats per minute, which is still a reasonable amount to keep up with. As for double tempo characters, this number is going to increase to 350 beats per minute, which is quite fast considering you have to make around 6 inputs every second. When players enter the room, they will encounter Death Metal alongside with 4 other enemies. Death Metal will always appear somewhere in the middle of the room. His gear consists of armor, a sight and a shield. As for the armor and sight, they have very little purposes as Death Metal isn't even using them during combat. As for the shield, this does actually serve a purpose. When players hit Death Metal from the front side, he will use his shield to protect himself. Not only will the attack of the players be blocked during this process, but Death Metal will also spawn in bats for every blocked hit. This is something that players want to avoid at all costs, as this makes the area a lot more crowded and therefore the fight itself a lot more chaotic. In order for players to deal damage to this boss, they will either have to attack Death Metal from the side or from the back. Be very wary when attacking him from these angles though, as Death Metal moves every third beat, and if you're standing right beside him and happen to have miscalculated some things, he is able to instantly turn around and attack you. Unfortunately enough, this fight isn't as simple as what's been described thus far. There's a bit more to this fight than simply hitting Death Metals from the right angles. In fact, Death Metal has a total of 4 phases and will get progressively more difficult throughout the fight. During the first phase, Death Metal is chasing the player. As mentioned previously on, he moves every third beat and will block any incoming damage when being attacked from the front side. Death Metal starts with a total of 9 hurt containers, and once the player has taken away 3 hurt containers, the second phase will start. During the second phase, Death Metal will drop his shield and start a summoning process. If the player doesn't manage to hit Death Metal within 4 beats during this time, he will spawn in relatively weak enemies. Once Death Metal has been hit, he will teleport to a random location in the room in an attempt to continue his summoning process. After Death Metal has less than 5 hurt containers remaining, the third phase will start. This phase is identically to the second phase, although this time around Death Metal will spawn in stronger enemy versions, making the fight somewhat more difficult. Once Death Metal has less than 3 hurt containers remaining, the last phase will start. During this phase, Death Metal moves every beat and is attempting to align himself with the player. After a certain amount of time, he raises his hand, shouts, and shoots a horizontal fireball across the room. That being said, it should be noted that the type of enemies at the start of the fight and during the summoning phase are not always the same for each encounter. This is because the boss fights in this game are given at random, and the enemies that appear during those boss fights are based on the type of zone that the player has cleared. This means that whenever the player encounters Death Metal after being the first zone, the type of enemies that are given from the start are ghosts. During the summoning phase, the enemies will be skeletons. As for the second zone, the enemies that are given from the start are clones, and for the summoning phase, the enemies will still be skeletons. Whenever the player encounters Death Metal after beating the third zone, the type of enemies that are given from the start are beetles, and during the summoning phase, the enemies will be skeleton knights. As for the final zone, the enemies that are given from the start are warlocks, and during the summoning phase, Death Metal will spawn in liches. Alright, now that we understand how this fight works and what kind of enemies we can expect, it is time to take a close look at all of the strategies we can use to defeat this boss. Starting off with the general strategies. Now the general strategies are oftentimes strategies that require the use of certain items such as spells or bombs and can be used by nearly every character in the game for nearly every boss variant. There's a total of 3 different strategies that we're going to take a look at. First off, we'll start with the quick kill strategy, and later on we'll dive into the spawn limit strategy as well as into the fireball/freeze strategy. The first strategy in this category is the quick kill strategy. Players can use this strategy for every death metal variant. The quick kill strategy can be executed by using a single bomb, and basically what the strategy does is that it allows players to skip the entire second and third phase of the fight and go straight towards the final phase. All credits for the strategy goes towards the player Spooty Biscuit. The first step requires players to enter the boss fight in the exact same line as where the boss is positioned. The boss will always spawn in the middle of the room, either in the exact middle or slightly to the left or slightly to the right. By entering this fight in the same line, players will always end up standing right beside death metal. From here on you can safely attack him. If you would enter this fight from another position, then there's a high chance you will not end up standing right beside death metal. Which means you can not only execute less of your attacks, but more importantly, in this case, the quick kill strategy doesn't work. Well, technically it still works, but it requires some kind of workaround, and this workaround will be explained later on this guide as well. But to keep it as simple as possible for now, it is best to enter this fight while standing in the exact same line as the boss. After you enter the boss fight while standing in the same line as death metal, it is recommended to take out the other enemies in the room first. This is because the enemies will approach the player and therefore they will interfere with the strategy. The only time players can ignore the enemies is during the Death Metal 2 boss fight. This is because the clones don't approach the player, and in most cases you can just simply ignore them and move on straight towards the strategy. After eliminating the enemies, it is time to execute the quick kill strategy. Basically what you want to do is go all the way to the bottom of the room and start to move back and forward. If done correctly, you will end up standing right beside death metal. From here on, take the following steps. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is hit death metal a total of 2 times. After you hit death metal a total of 2 times, immediately move 1 step upwards. And now this might be quite difficult to see, because death metal is standing in front of us, but we're actually standing right beside or behind death metal at this point. From here on, you want to place a single bomb, and after you place the bomb, you want to hit death metal another time. At this point, death metal will drop his shield and enter his second phase. Alright, so what you want to do next is to move up twice, and please, only move up twice, because if you're going to move up just 1 time and from there to the right side or the left side, you will still be standing in the blast radius of the bomb and you will get hit. So if you want to evade the bomb at all times, make sure to move up twice and nothing else. After moving up twice, what will happen is that death metal gets hit by the bomb. Considering you hit death metal a total of 3 times and the bomb itself does 4 damage, this will instantly bring him down to his final phase. So by using a single bomb, we've now skipped his entire second and third phase. From here on, it's simply a matter of finishing off the fight. As for finishing off the fight, this is very simple. All you have to do is to jump back and forward, so up and down, and by doing so you will automatically evade the fireball attacks. Once death metal has executed one of his fireball attacks, there's this short period of time where he doesn't attack you, or as I would like to call it, the cooldown time. And during this time, you can safely attack the boss and thereby finish him off. Simple as that. Okay, so that is basically how the quick kill strategy works. However, in the beginning I mentioned something about a possible workaround. I'm not sure if you guys remember that, but basically when you execute this strategy, you want to start off by standing right beside death metal. Now, sometimes it can happen that you don't end up standing right beside him, and there's actually several things that can cause this. So we're going to take a look at what can cause this and how we can solve this issue in order to stand right beside him, and from there on you can execute the strategy. Alright, so the first thing that can cause this issue is when you enter the fight but are not standing in the same line as death metal, and this is also the reason why I was pretty strict about this in the beginning, because I really want you to enter this fight in the same line, because if you do and you take out the ghost and everything goes according to plan, you will always end up standing right beside death metal, and that makes things a lot easier. Another issue that can cause this is when the player takes damage from an enemy in a room. Next to that, there's also a chance that you might miss the beat, and once you miss the beat, there's also a chance that you might not end up right beside him. And finally, it can happen that either yourself or death metal uses one of the bounce pad in the rooms, and when this happens, there's also a chance that you won't be standing right beside death metal at the start of the strategy. If by any chance one of these things has happened to you, then there's a few things you can do here. Players can either wait for death metal to come close and from there on execute the strategy, although that would mean that you will be skipping beats on purpose and therefore you will lose the multiplier, which means players will receive no rewards, or even worse, you might actually die if you're playing as Aria or Coda. Although this is still a solution, it's definitely not the best solution in most scenarios. So the better solution would be to jump over one of the bounce pads. There's a total of 7 bounce pads in the room, and if you feel like you've messed up during the fight, whether that's you got hit or you didn't enter in the same line as Death Metal, simply use one of the bounce pads and start moving back and forward on the bottom of the screen again. If you notice that you're not standing right beside Death Metal after he has moved, simply use a bounce pad once more. Keep repeating these steps until you and the boss stand right beside each other, and from there on it is safe to execute the strategy. Alright, so before we move on to see what characters can utilize this strategy, it is important to address the following thing. This strategy can only be used when the player has a +1 or +3 damage output. When the player has a damage output of +2, it will not work because Death Metal will always teleport away from the player once he lost his 4th hurt container. As for having a +3 damage output, it kind of works the same way as having a normal +1 output as well, although the beginning of the strategy is a bit different. So instead of hitting Death Metal twice, players should now make a clockwise or anti-clockwise rotation, and this will depend on your position with Death Metal himself. As a result of making this rotation, Death Metal will end up below you, and from here on we can continue the strategy as we know. This means placing a bomb, hitting Death Metal once and move up twice. By doing so, we will skip the entire summoning phase as well. Alright, so let's take a closer look at what characters can use this strategy. Out of all characters in the game, there is going to be a total of 3 characters that cannot use this strategy. The first one is Dorian, and Dorian doesn't work because Dorian has a +2 damage output by default, and as we know, a +2 damage output doesn't work with the strategy, not to mention that his boots make you skip one tile, and even if you place a bomb, Death Metal wouldn't even get hit by the bomb, so it's not gonna work. As for Eli, this is not going to work because Eli can only attack with bombs, and once you hit Death Metal with a bomb, he's automatically going to teleport away. Finally, for Melody, this strategy doesn't work either because from the moment you move up in the strategy, what will actually happen is that Death Metal will get hit, and before you can even place your bomb, he is already in his second phase and he's already moving back up, so it's definitely not gonna work. Usually, the gauntlet is quite a useful weapon, but in case of the quicker strategy, it is very counterproductive. The second strategy that we're going to take a look at is the spawn limit strategy. Now, spawn limit strategy can be used for Death Metal 1, Death Metal 2 and Death Metal 3. It is not possible to use this strategy for Death Metal 4 because we need Death Metal to spawn in skeletons during his summoning phase, and as we know, during the 4th zone he will spawn in liches instead, hence the strategy doesn't work. Basically, by using the spawn limit strategy, we can prevent Death Metal from spawning in any more enemies during the fight. This is because the amount of enemies in the room is at its maximum. I know this might sound dangerous, but it is nowhere near as bad as it seems. In fact, it's a relatively easy and safe strategy to execute. First step of the strategy consists of taking out the enemies in the room first. Once again, these enemies will interfere with the strategy, so it's best to get rid of them as soon as possible. Once you've managed to take out all of the enemies in the room, it is time to approach Death Metal, and from here on you want to hit him a few times, and this will make him go into his second phase. And during his second phase he will start a summoning process and he will spawn in white skeletons. Unfortunately enough, the white skeletons are no good use for us because they will die upon taking a single hit. And for this strategy we need to have the yellow skeletons. These type of skeletons will only spawn when Death Metal enters his 3rd phase. So in other words, keep on hitting the boss until he starts to spawn the yellow skeletons. Once Death Metal is spawning in the yellow skeletons, the next step is very straightforward. All you have to do from here is to hit the yellow skeleton once. Now, as a result of that, his head will be chopped off and his body will start to walk in the other direction. At this point, you want to ignore the skeletons that run away and you want to focus on the skeletons that spawn in. Simply keep hitting the skeletons that spawn in, but make sure you don't end up killing them. When executing this strategy, it is important to mention that players should stay in the middle of the room. This guarantees the most safety. When standing close to a bounce pad, it can happen that the skeleton will spawn in close and uses this bounce pad. This can catch you off guard, and because of this you might take damage in the process. Therefore, it is wise to stay in the middle of the room, as this gives you the most time to anticipate on the waves of enemies. Eventually, Death Metal is attempting to spawn in any more enemies, but guess what? That is right, the maximum number of enemies in the room has been reached. Now, the good news about this is that the enemies do not possess any threat whatsoever at this point, because they simply are unable to attack. So from here on it should be smooth sailing. Simply chase down Death Metal and keep hitting him to bring him down to his final phase. From here on, simply dodge his fireball attacks and attack him during his cooldown time in order to win the fight. Before we move on to see what characters can utilize this strategy, it is important to address the following thing. This strategy does not work when the player has a damage output of +2 or higher, because by having more than 2+ damage you will automatically kill the yellow skeletons, and therefore the strategy doesn't work. That's pretty self-explanatory, but nevertheless a good thing to mention. Moving on to see what characters can use this strategy. Out of all characters in the game, there is going to be a total of 2 characters that cannot use this strategy. The first one is Dorian, because Dorian has a +2 damage output by default, and therefore he will always kill the yellow skeletons instantly. And the second one is Eli, because Eli only attacks with his bombs, and as we know, bombs does 4 damage, so he will also instantly kill the yellow skeletons. Moving on to the final strategy, or strategy so to speak, is going to be the Fireball/Freeze strategy. These strategies require the use of either the Fireball/Freeze spells or the Fireball/Freeze scrolls, and they can be used for every death metal variant. Basically for the strategy, you want to start off the same way as the quick kill strategy. Start off by entering the fight in the same line as death metal. This time however, there is no need to kill the enemies first. In most scenarios you can simply ignore them and move straight to the boss. Once you stand in front of the boss, either move to the left side or the right side, doesn't really matter. The boss will now stand right beside you. From here on it is time to execute the strategy, and now the execution part varies a bit depending on what kind of spell scroll you're using. First off, let's take a close look at both the Fireball spell and Fireball scroll strategy. Basically when it comes down to the Fireball strategies, you want to start off by hitting death metal a total of 3 times. This will bring him down into his second phase, so from here on pop your Fireball spell or Fireball scroll. As for the Fireball spell, this unfortunately does not kill him, but will still deal a lot of damage to the boss. When using the Fireball spell, all you have to do is to hit death metal one more time, and this will automatically bring him down to his final phase. As for the Fireball scroll, this will instantly eliminate death metal. You can in fact also use the Fireball scroll after only hitting death metal once, as the scroll itself does a total of 8 damage. Combine that with a single hit and you've already won yourself the battle. Moving on to the Freeze spell and Freeze scroll. This is pretty much the same thing. When standing beside death metal, you want to hit him a total of 2 times. After hitting him twice, use your Freeze spell or Freeze scroll. The good news about this is that you can keep on hitting the boss until the force effect has been worn off, so he won't be able to teleport away during this time, and this gives us the opportunity to do massive damage if not eliminate the boss straight away. Okay, so that is basically it for the Fireball and Freeze strategies. Before we move on to see what characters can utilize these strategies, it's important to address the following thing. When players are using a Freeze spell or Freeze scroll and are playing as either Coda or Monk, it is very important that they are aware of their damage output. As been explained before, death metal will always stay on the same spot when being frozen. If you happen to miscalculate some things with your damage output, you might actually tap a few more times than you intend to do, which means you will instantly step on a pile of gold, and as we know, on Coda and Monk you will instantly die from gold. So when playing as Coda or Monk, it is very important that players know how many times they are going to hit death metal, even before they activate their Freeze spell or Freeze scroll. So always take a look at your build, know how many times you're going to need to hit death metal to kill him, and then use your Freeze spell or Freeze scroll. Moving on to see what characters can use this strategy. Out of all characters in the game, everyone can use this strategy. Hey, so finally we've got ourselves a strategy that is suitable for each and every character in the game. Now that we understand how each of the general strategies work, it is time to take a closer look at how we can approach this boss fight outside of using items. You see, the general strategies often require the use of certain items, such as spells or bombs. However, there might be scenarios where you don't have these items available, such as in a low percent run for example. If that is the case, then the approach to these fights is obviously going to be different. In this section we are diving into low percent strategies. We're going to take a look at each death metal variant. This means death metal 1, death metal 2, death metal 3 and death metal 4, and we're going to see how we can approach these fights without using any items. So let's go. Starting off with death metal 1. Now the first death metal variant shouldn't cause you too much issues, as the enemies in this variant are very predictable, making death metal 1 one of the easiest variants of them all. It is recommended to start off the same way as the quick kill strategy, which means entering the fight from the same line as death metal. From here on you want to eliminate the ghosts, and afterwards you want to go to the middle of the room. If everything goes according to plan, you will end up standing exactly beside the boss. If not, you should know what to do by now. Just simply use a bounce pad and eventually you will end up standing right beside death metal. At this point you want to hit Death Metal a total of 4 times, so 3 times during his first phase, which will put him in his second phase, and from there on you can hit him another time. The reason we want to attack Death Metal in the middle of the room is because once Death Metal gets hit during his second phase, he will teleport to a random location, and now, since we're already standing in the middle of the room, this kind of gives us an advantage. This is because the distance we have to walk to his new location is relatively short. It buys us a bit more time to reach him before he spawns in any skeletons, so by attacking him in the middle of the room, it's almost guaranteed that the first hit after he teleported is free. From here on it gets a bit luck based to wherever he is going to teleport each time. Sometimes he teleports in close and sometimes he teleports far away. On some occasions you might get really unlucky where he teleports in one corner and after being hit he will teleport to the exact opposite corner, usually resulting in not having enough time to hit him. This is a bad thing because when he spawns in skeletons, this fight gets a whole lot messier. Fortunately enough, we already have one hit for free, so it only takes one more hit to put him in his third phase. This is a good thing because even if you end up feeling overwhelmed at that point, you can always take a slower yet safer approach, and that is by implementing the spawn limit strategy. So the spawn limit strategy is actually a suitable strategy for low percent wins as well. Hopefully enough it doesn't come that far and you can simply chase him down without him spawning in any skeletons. So that's basically what you want to do from here. Keep on chasing him and eventually he will enter his final phase where you can finish him off. Next up we've got Death Metal 2. Now Death Metal 2 is probably the easiest variant out of them all, and this is because in most scenarios you can simply ignore all of the enemies and focus only on the boss himself. As for the second Death Metal boss variant, the approach is somewhat more different compared to the other variants. So instead of eliminating the enemies at the start first, what you want to do now is actually quite the opposite. You want to keep them alive. Not only are these clones rather annoying to take out, but there's also another reason why it's so important to keep them alive, which is something we'll come back to soon enough. Once again, it is recommended to start the fight by entering the same line as Death Metal. Instead of directly approaching the boss or the enemies, this time players should make a big rotation around the room. So you can either do this in a clockwise or anti-clockwise rotation, it doesn't really matter. As long as you make the biggest rotation you possibly can, so try to reach out to each corner in the room. As a result of making these rotations, what will happen is that all of these individual clones will actually stick together and form a group. Now this is very useful because not only will this decrease the chance of colliding into one of these clones, but also we have more control over the entire group of enemies, so moving around the area is going to be a lot easier than when you have like several clones all over the place. Once the player has managed to create a group of clones, it is time to take on the boss, and from here on it's the same principle as what's been explained before. Players should try to hit the boss a total of 3 times in the middle of the room, and once Death Metal enters his second phase, hit him another time and he will teleport away to a random location. And now comes the fun part. So usually Death Metal is quite dangerous during his summoning phase. If you end up slacking a lot, he will spawn in those skeletons and the fight itself gets really hectic. However, this time around Death Metal can only spawn up to a single skeleton when all of the clones are still within the room. This is very similar to the spawn limit strategy that has been explained previously on. Basically at this point the maximum amount of enemies in the room has been reached. And this is also the main reason why it's so important to keep those clones alive. Having to deal with one group of clones and a single skeleton shouldn't be too much of an issue. In the end, players have full control over the group of clones and only have to worry about Death Metal and one single skeleton, which in itself is very doable. As for the remaining part of the fight, it is recommended to walk around in big circles, so this way you will always avoid the clones and can simply attack Death Metal whenever he ends up getting close. Basically keep doing this until the fight is over, simple as that. Moving on to Death Metal 3. Now out of all Death Metal variants, the third variant is by far the hardest one out of them all. And this is because the type of enemies are rather annoying to deal with, so get ready as things are going to get a lot worse from here on. Once again we want to enter this fight by standing in the same line as Death Metal, and from here on we want to eliminate all of the beetles first. It is highly recommended to take out the beetles near the edges of the room, but try to avoid the 2 bottom rows as much as you can. And now the reason of this is it doesn't have to do anything with this particular strategy, but it might actually prevent you from executing any other strategies, such as the quick kill strategy for example. Basically when players approach an ice or fire beetle, they will either drop hot coals or ice tiles, and now if the whole bottom section will be covered with these type of tiles, then there's a high chance that you won't be able to execute any other strategy. Even though this section primarily focuses on a low percent approach, I think it's still a good thing to take note of, just in case you're planning to go for a different strategy. So the best way to go by is to eliminate either 1 or 2 beetles as soon as you enter the fight, and from there on move to the opposite side of the room and finish off the remaining beetles. As previously mentioned, it is recommended to take out the beetles near the edges of the room. By doing so, you will make sure that the middle part of the room will be clear of hot cores and ice tiles, and that is certainly going to help during the summoning phase, because most of the time you will be walking toward the middle of the room when chasing down death metal, and it could be annoying when there's like ice tiles or hot cores in your way during that time. Moreover, there's also a high chance that you will be fighting off skeleton knights in the middle of the room as well, and that's another reason why you want to have those hazards near the edges of the room, as this way you won't be hindered by hot cores or ice tiles during combat. Once every beetle has been dealt with, it is time to make your way towards the middle of the room. Once again, do exactly the same as what's been explained previously on, which is hitting death metal a total of 3 times to make him go in the second phase, hit him another time to make him teleport away, and from there on keep on chasing him throughout the room. As for the summoning part, try to rush through it as much as you can. The skeleton knights, especially when playing as double tempo characters, are quite annoying to deal with, and altogether they can end your run in just a matter of seconds. In the occasion that death metal spawns in one skeleton knight, try to avoid it first and go straight after death metal. Eventually the skeleton knight will catch up to you, meaning you have to deal with it, but hopefully by this time you have reached death metal's 3rd phase. It is important that we reach his 3rd phase as soon as possible. By reaching his 3rd phase, death metal will spawn in yellow skeleton knights, and once again, that is a good thing because this gives us the opportunity to make use of our old and faithful spawn limit strategy. From here on, players can decide if they want to keep on chasing death metal for the rest of the fight, which is recommended if there are no skeleton knights around, or if they want to take a slower yet safer approach by using the spawn limit strategy. Either way, eventually death metal will reach its final phase, and from here on it is simply a matter of finishing him off. Last up, we've got Death Metal 4, and now Death Metal 4 is the final version of Death Metal and is probably the 2nd hardest version of them all, so it is not going to be too easy, but with the right approach it is certainly doable. Speaking of approach, let's see how we can tackle this boss. Now the first thing I want to do is, and you probably already guessed it by now, is to enter the fight in the same line as Death Metal. From here on, take out the warlocks first. It is recommended that you take out each warlock individually, so take out a warlock, walk a bit around the room and take out the next one. Try not to take them out while they're standing close to each other, as otherwise you might accidentally teleport into the group of enemies, and this means that you most likely will get hit in the process, so if you want to be safe, try to take them out individually. Once the warlocks have been dealt with, make your way towards the middle of the room, and from here on it's the same old story again. Hit death metal a total of 3 times, this will initialize his 2nd phase. From here on, hit him another time and he will teleport away. As for the summoning phase, it is highly recommended to rush as much as you possibly can, similar to what we've seen in the Death Metal 3 boss variant. Even when death metal spawns in one of those liches, make sure to avoid them and go straight after death metal, preferably all the way until his last phase. By taking out liches you will lose valuable time and will therefore most certainly not make it before death metal spawns in another lich. Having multiple liches in the room can be very frustrating, and therefore you want to end this summoning phase as quickly as you can. The only time it's recommended to take out the lich is when the enemy is directly blocking your path towards death metal. When this happens, there's not really a reason to make a detour, because in most scenarios you won't make it before death metal spawns in another lich. Therefore you might as well use the moment to get rid of the lich blocking your path. One important thing to mention is that despite you avoiding the liches, you should not completely ignore them. Always keep an eye out for those enemies, because oftentimes you will cross their path and in that moment they will confuse you. Knowing that you're about to get confused actually helps you during combat, as you're less likely to mess things up. Another important thing to mention is that the confusion effect of the liches lasts for a total of 4 beats, so when you're chasing down death metal and suddenly get confused, you can still continue to chase him down. All you have to do from here is to make sure that the next 4 inputs are in the opposite direction of where you want to go to, and after the 4 beat you want to make regular inputs again. This might sound difficult, but it's actually fairly easy with some practice. Alright, so that is basically it for Death Metal 4. You want to run like an absolute madman, you want to ignore those liches, and even in the rare occasion that you might get confused, try to make reversed inputs. Keep on chasing him down to his final phase, and from there on it's simply a matter of finishing him off. Now that we've covered both the general strategies as well as the low percent strategies, we should have a full understanding on how to approach this boss fight. However, there is one minor thing we haven't covered yet, and that might surprise you, as we've already been going very in depth on this one. So basically the low percent strategies that have been explained so far can nearly be used by every character in the game, but some characters work different. After all, each character has its own mechanics, and sometimes one character has an entire different approach to the fight than other characters. That is where the final section comes in. In this section we are going to take a look at each character in the game and see how we can approach this boss fight the best way possible. As for Aria, Bard, Cadence and Melody, everything stays the same as what has been explained in the previous chapters. As for both, the approach also stays the same as what has been explained previously on, although this time around it is highly recommended to rely on a spawn limit strategy as much as you can. This is because the fight itself is very hectic and requires a lot of fast and flawless inputs. The chances are high that you might miss a beat or more, and when playing as Bolt it can go from good to bad in just a matter of seconds. Using the spawn limit strategy will help a lot when playing as Bolt. You might lose your multiplier, which means no rewards at the end, but you will definitely save yourself a lot of trouble for the remaining part of the fight. As for Dorian, the approach for this fight is going to be slightly different than the other characters. At first you might think that fighting off death matter as Dorian is going to be difficult, as a lot of other strategies don't work. Fortunately enough, it is actually quite the opposite. Fighting off death matter as Dorian is relatively easy. The main reason for this is because of his boots. His boots make it significantly easier to catch up to death metal. When playing as Dorian, it is recommended that you keep on chasing death metal all the way through. You will be surprised how fast you can keep up with death metal during the summoning phase. Combine the boots with a +2 damage output, and this fight shouldn't cause you too much issues. As for Eli, now Eli is quite an interesting character when it comes down to boss fights. When playing as Eli, some boss fights are very easy and some boss fights are pretty difficult. As for the death metal boss fight, most of the fights are relatively easy, and this is because you can reach the final phase relatively fast when playing as Eli. The bomb itself does a total of 4 damage, which means death metal only has to be hit twice in order to reach his final phase. Basically all you have to do is to take out the enemies first, bomb death metal once and pay close attention to where he's going to spawn next. From here on, try to line yourself up with the boss so you can kick a bomb in his direction. It is definitely not recommended to walk all the way towards death metal and place a bomb, as there's simply not enough time for that. After another bomb hits the boss, you will enter his last phase. At this point you should know the drill, keep jumping back and forth, dodge his fireballs and kick another bomb in his direction to finish him off. One useful tip for Eli is that sometimes you might be able to kill off one of the enemies even before entering the room. This is because occasionally one of the enemies is standing really close towards the middle of the room. If you notice that an enemy is standing quite close towards the middle of the room, you can actually eliminate the enemy even without entering the fight. Simply stand in the door opening, place a bomb, move a step backwards and kick the bomb into the enemy. This gives you already a free kill to start with and creates a little bit more breathing space for the rest of the fight. Finally, the approach for Monk as well as Coda is going to stay the same as what has been explained previously on, although there are a few things to look out for when playing one of these two characters. One of your biggest concerns when playing as either Monk or Coda is going to be gold. Now there's a few tips that can be given that will decrease the chance of stepping into gold when fighting off death metal. Firstly, it is highly recommended to take out the enemies in groups. Now remember when I said that you want to take out the enemies individually? Well, that is usually the case with the other characters, but when playing as Monk or Coda it's actually quite the opposite. It's better to take them out in groups. By taking them out in groups, most of the enemies will die on the same spot. This means that the money that will be dropped will also be stacked on top of each other, and that is very helpful as there's less money around the area, and it will certainly decrease the chance of accidentally walking into money. It makes navigating throughout the area a whole lot easier. Another recommendation is that you don't take out enemies near the bottom of the screen, and now there's actually two good reasons for that. Firstly, you might interfere with another strategy, such as the quick kill strategy for example. Secondly, when there's gold laying down on the bottom row, it is actually pretty difficult to see where exactly the money is located. Especially if there's only like one coin laying on the bottom row, that's going to be really difficult to see. Most of the time you will be focused on the middle part of the room, fighting off enemies, and in most scenarios you tend to back up a lot during combat. and when you're backing up and there's money laying behind you, it's really easy to miss that. Therefore, try to avoid eliminating enemies on the bottom row. It is better to eliminate the enemies near the top of the screen, because this way you will have plenty of time to spot the money when you walk around the area. And that basically sums it up for the death metal boss fight. We've been through the general strategies, the low percent strategies, as well as the character specific strategies. By now you should have a full understanding on how to tackle this boss fight in pretty much every scenario. If there's still a strategy that you're aware of but has not been covered in this guide yet, feel free to leave a comment down below, as not only am I curious to see what this strategy is about, but also it might help out other players who are trying to get better at this particular boss fight. That being said, I would like to thank you all for watching. I'm aware of the fact that these guides are quite lengthy and I've been trying my best to cut down on the time as much as I possibly can. But then again, there are a lot of things to cover and I want to make sure that everything is covered, as this will set you up for the best possible scenario. For those interested in the other boss fights, feel free to stick around the channel, as I will be making videos on those as well. So yeah, that is about it. Once again, thank you guys for watching and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Take care until next time. Bye.